Welcome to the Temple Mount podcast. Today we have Drewish for the third time on my podcast, talking about his book, Practical Epistemology, and also hopefully reading a little bit of this. It's an upcoming book. He's read some of it before. You can find those episodes in the Roundtable podcast channel of the Temple Mount server. Make sure you've joined the Temple Mount server. Like, follow, and subscribe to Temple Mount and Roundtable podcast. You can find them both in the Temple Mount Discord server. That being said, welcome, Drewish. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing rather well, actually. It's been a good day.
I'm very glad to hear that, my friend. It's been a great day for me as well, and it's going to get even better now because we're going to listen to some of your book. So without further ado, I will post
them. I read some chapters, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, I'll post the previous two episodes for everyone in the room in the general chat. So make sure you bookmark those for later and listen to them later. I'm going to provide those links. But for now, Drewish, where do you want to take us into practical epistemology today?
I think I'll do a quick recap so that people understand what we're talking about. Epistemology is the philosophy of how you know what is true, basically. The search for truth, if you will. Practical epistemology is the title of the book because it's about applied epistemology. Actually, how to try and discern what's true and what isn't in your own life in a realistic way. Thus far, I've read a number of chapters. I've read the last chapter of the book, ironically, which is because it's a summary of the book. And I read last time the first 4 chapters, as well as one of the later chapters entitled Science is Not Self-Correcting. Today, I am prepared to read the next 3 chronological chapters in order, entitled All Evidence is Anecdotal, Trust is Our Only Honest Proxy for Truth, and Don't Right Become Right, as well as one of the later chapters, Artificial Inquisition. But before I go into further reading from the book, I just want to say that if anyone has any questions regarding general epistemology, or if anyone who has listened to the 2 previous podcasts has any questions that have formed in their mind that they've been waiting to ask, feel free. Not to put anyone on the spot, though. I mean, if not, I think I will start by probably rereading the dedication, only because I know that it gets referenced and touched upon slightly in these chapters that I'm going to read, and so it's probably best to have that fresh in people's mind prior to reading those chapters. The dedication, okay. Dedicated to and written for my daughter Clementine. There are lessons that can and should be taught at an early age. Then there are things that only life can teach us. Integrity is a value best learned early, but recognizing it in others will take enduring the inevitable betrayal and disappointment that always finds those who do not hide from life. I've not always been a trustworthy person. I learned to fake integrity, justifying my manipulation. I thought, people lie to themselves constantly. They do not actually want the truth, and I am punished as often as rewarded when I am honest. The sad reality is that I could not lie to others and not make it a habit, by which I came to lose track of what was even a lie anymore. How can we trust others if we know we are not trustworthy? How can I trust that I am being honest with you if I know I cannot trust myself? You are my child, and I want to be someone you can rely on for an honest judgment. I hope to help you to know and see in others the integrity I want for you. People rarely change after a certain age, and when they do, it's often for the worse. But I must try. This text is as much a roadmap for myself in knowing that integrity which I must model for you as anything else. I can sense honesty because I know the smell of deception so well. Contained within are lessons learned the hard way, in the hopes that you may be spared some of the harsher trials of that journey. So, to refresh people's notion of how I've formatted this text, every chapter I begin with a quote. Sometimes I also end them on a quote, but not always. And I will, though there are many references, and sources that I intersperse throughout, asides, articles, and things like that. That's mainly that doesn't really translate very well to step aside for reading those, and so I'll merely be reading the text as written, and will avoid any of the citations or examples which are shown on the side uh, that aren't in line in that regard. So if it seems like I'm making a whole lot of claims and not giving enough examples, uh, if you actually look at the text, you would see a whole lot more in the way of expanding upon the ideas that are in there. Um, so the first chapter, which I'm prepared to read, is entitled "All Evidence is Anecdotal." I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that now I can't believe you. Friedrich Nietzsche. Imagine a scenario where the internet is gone. You have no maps and need to get to a rendezvous point to meet a friend. Would you be better served by having the precise address or turn by turn instructions to get there from your current location? The answer to the question, where is it, is far less useful than how do I get there? Have you ever read the methodology of a scientific paper? It's a section describing the way in which the data for the study was gathered and then turned into the resulting information presented. If you want to know what was the specific wording they used for questions on this poll, or did they drop any of the results as outliers, then look to the methodology. If the study is an answer to a question, then its methodology is its story or how that question was answered. If you wish to run an experiment yourself to see if you can replicate the results, then the methodology will give you the recipe. When Galileo posited forth his law of inertia, which is very similar to Newton's first law of motion, he put forth an imagined experiment. I say imagined experiment because, as the story goes, he never actually ran it. In this experiment, a rider on a horse has a ball, which he drops while the horse remains stationary. The ball falls beside the horse. Then, the horse moves forward at a stable gallop, and the rider drops another ball in the same way. Rather than falling where he let go, it continues to move forward until it hits the ground, again falling beside the horse. In this way, the rider could toss a ball straight up and then catch it again, as long as he continues to move forward at the same speed. By giving a story of how one might test his hypothesis, he gave a means to falsify, and thus verify his claim. Have you ever wished that political debates or interviews would ask candidates why they hold a position? If a moderator asked, "You were opposed to this policy for years, and now you support it. What changed your mind?" What would we get as a response? Assuming they aren't allowed to evade the question, we would get a story. Likely a dishonest one, but a justification for how their mind was changed. The explanation of how someone came to know or believe what they do is far more convincing than them simply stating their position. I shake my head whenever people try to push a position or opinion as right or truthful based on some poll or a perceived consensus. Nobody cares what you believe, they care about why you believe it. Maybe you are convinced something is true because you've seen photographic evidence and heard witness testimony. So share the photos and the transcripts or recordings of that testimony. Now, if you already trust a person, an institution, or a source, maybe their reputation is enough for you. You trust their authority, and so you don't feel the need to question the details. That's fine. But do you get to choose, at least in free societies, which people and organizations you trust? If you don't trust the source making the claim, either because you don't know them very well or because you've had them lie to you in the past, then of course you will want them to show their work. After all, if what they're saying is true, then asking a few questions should help to clarify things, right? Of course, if then the excuses come out, oh, but statistics can't be twisted, and the public is uninformed, or statistics can be twisted, and the public is uninformed. If we share the raw data, they won't understand it. then how do you know they aren't manipulating those statistics? Or maybe it's the evidence requires security clearance, so you're just going to have to trust us. Sounds reasonable enough, but the landmark case that established the state secret privilege was based on a lie. See United States versus Reynolds and the related declassified documents for more on that. How about this one? They're after me for what I know. I don't want to put you at risk. Ah, so it's just fine to tell you their theory, but too dangerous to substantiate it? And the list goes on and on. Now, sometimes people admit when their justifications are flimsy, such as, I heard it someplace, but I can't remember where. There's nothing wrong with admitting that you're operating on an impression or flimsy justification, so long as the resulting conclusion is easily displaced by firmer evidence. Be wary of those who would obscure their reasoning or hide the story behind their claims. If someone refuses to even explain why they believe something, and they haven't established trust, or worse, have abused your trust in the past, then you'd be a fool to trust them now. And just as a side note, you should disregard meta analyses. A meta analysis is when, instead of running a study or series of experiments themselves, someone combines several research papers from various sources and use their conclusions as data points in their study. These are often hailed as a way of overcoming whatever biases might slip into a single experiment and increasing the effective sample size. However, they assume that failures of scientific rigor are the exception, not the rule. They do not account for biases that are pervasive across scientific studies. What's worse, they add an additional layer, hiding the how. If you have any doubts about the credibility of the underlying studies or the source compiling the meta analysis, they've essentially obscured their results so that it becomes that much more difficult to understand the story behind their claims. At this point, I'm just going to read through these first three chapters that I'm sharing, and then open up for questions because they really are all meant to be consumed together. Um, Trust is our only honest proxy for truth. You may be deceived if you trust too much, but you will live in torment if you don't trust enough. Frank Crane. In the beginning of our lives, we require a rapid acquisition of large amounts of knowledge. It's a huge advantage to have parents or other trusted adults who have your best interests at heart, believe in models that accurately reflect reality, and can communicate and pass on that knowledge effectively. With that, you'll have a solid head start. Not because all the models you were given will stand the test of time, but because a complete reappraisal of even core ideas and beliefs is so difficult that it's often traumatic. This is not only because so many of your assumptions, heuristics, and even your view of self must be reevaluated, but also because this means the people you have placed your trust in are now suspect. There was a common refrain in a reoccurring scandal in the Catholic Church at the beginning of the 21st century. There have been several cases of children being sexually molested by priests prior to this point. There had even been local and national dioceses being exposed as having helped to cover up some of these crimes, moving clergy and protecting them from prosecution. What changed at the turn of the century was that this pattern had repeated in so many countries, and the records were showing that some clergy were being moved even between countries, that a disturbing conclusion became clear. These were not one off events or bad apples in the Catholic Church. Instead, the Vatican and church institutions themselves were complicit and even willing participants in this mass cover up of childhood abuse and predation. For many victims, their parishioners were less than supportive. These people were invested in the church. So much of their life, their meaning was derived from it. And besides, didn't the church do so much good around the world? Wasn't it the better, the more Christ like approach to just shut up about it so that the reputation of the Catholic Church would not be sullied? At least that message of guilt and shame was what victims were often met with if they dared come forward. For them, if they did so, it was clear. They would not have a home in the church anymore. Though perhaps an extreme example, the mere loss of trust in something you once fully put your faith in can be devastating, even if the costs are only self-imposed. If your parents loved you and cared about you and were themselves dedicated to a political or ideological cause, a cause that you then one day come to reject, would that not strain your connection with them? Disillusionment with our heroes, our leaders, and those we once counted in our inner circle are damaging because they are more than the relationship we have with them. They are trusted sources, people or entities we think or thought we could count on to tell us things, to teach us things, to guide us so that we did not have to learn every lesson the hard way. There are differences in the trust we give implicitly to authority figures thrust upon us in our youth, and those we choose as aged and perhaps jaded adults. For those we find after having become somewhat formed in our ideas and attitudes, we often slowly and cautiously appraise them. They must earn our trust by saying things which we can count as true in ways we can understand and use, and only then will hardened minds come to see each claim they make with less wary. After a time, we may come to be less inclined to look into every statement that they make because they've proven to us that they can be trusted. So we relax and thank them for the guidance. Going back to the first group, though, the ones we trust as authority figures from our youth, that trust is different. Sometimes it is earned. I make every effort to explain my reasoning and the how and why of my views whenever my daughter asks, and Clementine, if you are in fact reading this, you need no source for that claim. But the line, because I said so, is not foreign for many a parent. A justification is not, and indeed perhaps should not always be required. Many people never really change in this regard. They were told what to trust. They never questioned, and so they continue in, hopefully, blissful ignorance, so long as the institutions and people they have faith in are wise and do not take advantage of that trust. It's a big if. This is why discussion of the child sex scandals was so dangerous to the Catholic Church. The real danger of letting these things permeate the public discourse is in giving people permission to ask, should I put my faith in them? Once that implicit trust is broken, it is near impossible to regain. Only the more shallow and skeptically earned trust might be hard won, and that is of very little use to those who view trust as marketing strategy, enabling them to take advantage of brand loyalty. Perhaps you may be thinking, you have found a shortcut. You can observe things with your own eyes. You know how corrupted authority figures can be, how dubious the claims of ancient texts, and how dumb most people are, unlike yourself, of course. Why not simply trust yourself? Well, first off, there's the obvious response that you have plenty of preconceived notions and ideas that you didn't come up with yourself. Unless you were raised in the wilderness with no human contact, in which case, how are you reading this? Don't lie to yourself that all your ideas are your own. They're not. Better to identify that so you can appraise them earnestly instead of stubbornly never changing your mind about anything. It's not a bad thing to take some things on faith. You're effectively required to, but admit it to yourself when you are. If we do not outsource something of our understandings of the world, then the paranoia, the isolation, and indeed the massive time sink required to learn anything becomes impossible to handle. We have thousands of years of human knowledge and experience behind us. If it truly is your desire to start over from scratch, then please put this book down and go build yourself a shelter in the woods where you might be alone with your thoughts. You are not smart enough not to have people you trust, who you can rely upon to tell you when you're wrong. Nobody is. Don't be right, become right. Stupidity combined with arrogance and a huge ego will get you a long way. Chris Lowe. There's this notion in academic study that researchers should avoid attaching themselves emotionally to a particular hypothesis. If they have staked their career on validating a particular prediction, and then evidence is found that disproves it, they should applaud the findings and embrace the truth. Of course, science doesn't work like that. More on that later. But it's a noble sounding idea. The thought that we can dedicate ourselves with passion to the pursuit of truth while having no vested stake in the outcome of our questions? It's really no wonder that earnest humility is so much easier to pretend at than to really have, and not because it's simple to fake. Changing your mind is hard. Think of your most prized, most cherished, and most greatly valued belief. It could be your faith in God, or a belief that there are no gods. It could be a certainty in the equality of humanity, or perhaps in the superiority of certain people. It might be trust in the love of your spouse. It could be your belief that you are a good person who values the truth and is concerned for those around you. If you were wrong, would you want to know? So, how do people grapple with the limitations of their own knowledge and the fragility of their egos while still trying to pursue the truth in earnest and live by their stated beliefs and values? Simple. We usually don't, and adopt a variety of coping mechanisms, all of which involve lying to ourselves instead. Far more people claim objectivity, some, than ever achieve it, none. Peop well, I'm sorry, I lost my place 1 second here. Oh, sorry. People who claim they have no biases are lying to themselves about as much as those that say they take nothing on faith. There are those who make no such claims at objectivity, claiming instead that they can't because there is no truth. They don't humbly admit that the truth is beyond them to ever fully grasp. They're instead there's let me say the sentence again. I apologize. I'm going to grab a drink real quick. My voice is going. There are those who make no such claims at objectivity, claiming instead that they can't because there is no truth. They're not humbly admitting that the truth is beyond them to ever fully grasp. They're instead insisting that it simply does not exist. These people, despite suggesting that all is subjective, still manage to have opinions. In fact, they pretty much always have opinions about other people and society. It's almost like they want to use the, well, that's like just your opinion, man, cop out selectively whenever they don't want to have to bother defending their views. Then there are people who say, yes, there is truth, but I know I'll never be able to know it, so why bother? I guess it is possible to not care about the truth, even as the world bears down on you, with voices shouting, demanding that you accept their version of it. How lonely a road to both believe in the truth, knowing you cannot ever fully attain it, yet striving for it anyways. Aren't, aren't these shortcuts simpler? Why bother taking pride in changing your mind or living out difficult beliefs? We can just be proud of having expedient views and letting the world tell you that you are a smarter, more righteous, and just a better person overall because you hold them. I once got into a pleasant disagreement with a stranger on a Discord server. I was thinking aloud about the possible benefits of using helium balloons for enabling small scale payloads into orbit with less fuel, since they could begin at a level above the troposphere. One of the benefits I stated would be the diminished air pressure exerted downward on said payload from its higher altitude. Another person, upon hearing this, vehemently disagreed. The air was below as well as above the object, so there would be no discernible difference that air pressure would have on the energy required to leave orbit, so say they. After a passionate, if impromptu, debate, where we laid out our views and reasoning, we both independently determined to dig deeper into the issue mid-discussion to solidify our positions. Turns out you should really think of air pressure the same way you do buoyancy in water. The higher up a solid object goes, the more dense it is relative to the surrounding air, so air pressure does have an impact, but in the opposite way that I had intuited it. We were both wrong, and we came to that realization at nearly the exact same time. We had been cutting. We had put our egos on the line, and a few insults had been slung, but we were both glad to have learned something from the exchange, admitted our mistakes, and laughed. The rarity of that moment, where we both found someone willing to actively, aggressively advocate for their view, and then admit with no reservations that they had been mistaken, was wonderful. He and I are friends to this day. The path in pursuit of the truth may seem lonely, if only because of how few travel it, but the pacts and bonds made along it are stronger than any based on convenience or even ideological beliefs. Your beliefs and others might change. In fact, if you seek the truth, they almost invariably will. There are destinations along the way, and others will gladly accept you into their fold so long as you stay. Allies in the pursuit of truth, however, they're traveling companions and my favorite friends along the journey of life. Sound like something you want? Are you sure? Take a political position you hold, something important to you. If you were shown that the political figures and their policies which you have supported effectively work against their stated goals, and furthermore, that they knew this, what would that mean? It would mean that you were duped, and that you were actively supporting evil insofar as somebody who manipulates others to gain power is evil. It would mean that the people that you have looked down upon, viewing as either ignorant or evil themselves, well, you owe them an apology, and you should be humbled, if not outright humiliated, by how you were taken in. Oh gosh, does this mean you would now need to say you were right to that family member you can't stand at the next Thanksgiving gathering? Are you willing to do that? If you are to strive to take pride not in being right, but in becoming right, then you need to be honest with yourself about what your limitations are. If there are things you are not willing to question, that's okay. To navigate the world, we have to make assumptions. And reappraising everything is a luxury left to teenagers and 20 somethings with too much spare time and no one else who relies on them. But let's be honest with ourselves about what these questions we refuse to ask are. Like I said before, admit what you take on faith, but certainly know what you are and are not open to changing your mind about. Using heuristics and having hangups are unavoidable, but they don't need to be blind spots. It's a noble goal to be more concerned with becoming right than being right. It's also one few people have, and of those who do, most fail miserably. That's all right, because knowing our limitations is our best weapon in overcoming them. Introspection and humility won't stop you from putting your foot in your mouth or acting the fool at times, but they can help you to be self correcting. This friend I met because of debate over air pressure, he invited me to join his server. The place had a firm libertarian bend when I joined. I had once been of that mind, but was no longer at that point. Regardless, I greatly enjoyed the political discussions there, entirely because it was a group of people who disagreed with me, where my willingness to give reasoning and arguments for why I disagreed with them was welcomed and appreciated. They were accustomed to people either accusing them of lacking empathy or dismissal, something akin to, oh, I used to think that way, then I grew up, with no further explanation given. Yes, I'm effectively not giving you mine with this example, but this is a book about epistemology, not political philosophy. Over time, however, something unfortunate happened, from my perspective. The culture of the server changed as more people began to accept my views on positions. My arguments were novel to them. They were open to having their minds changed, and they did so. Why is that a bad thing? Well, because I would have much rather learned from them than the other way around. Not because I wanted to be wrong, but because I selfishly would rather learn something from a conversation than teach something. If you want to be informed without being arrogant and pursue the truth honestly, adopt this mantra. Become selfish in this way. And it ends with a quote. Wisdom is the reward you get for a lifetime of listening when you'd preferred to talk. Doug Larson. Okay, I'm going to take a quick water break after reading those 3 chapters. But yeah, to anyone who is actually, if you've listened to the previous podcast, if you listen to the earlier chapters followed by those, you'll see how they're building upon each other chronologically and conceptually as well. I guess I should open it up for some questions if people have them. I mean, there were a lot of things that I touched upon there.
No questions, but I just want to say thanks. Your work seems really good.
Well, thank you. I'll take the compliment as being earnest and honest. So I and I want, as I stated in probably I think the first podcast, it was actually a discussion on, well, the server that this one has replaced, that led me to conclude that I should be writing this book in the first place. So this is as much an impetus. I'm giving back, hopefully, by sharing this a little bit, because this place is a watering hole where all types are welcome and a lot of topics are discussed, and there's a whole lot of value in that. So, I mean, I can just read the other chapter that I'm prepared to read, but I don't know if that's what people want.
I mean, I'll speak for myself here, but I'd love for you to read more. But others can talk as well.
All right. I will go and read one other chapter. This is a chapter which occurs slightly later. There might be things that it references in passing which aren't fully explained in the same way that I kind of referenced heuristics in that chapter without bothering to explain what they were because they were explained in an earlier chapter. Um, this chapter is called Artificial Inquisition. Our society tends to regard as a sickness any mode of thought or behavior that is inconvenient for the system, and this is plausible because when an individual doesn't fit into the system, it causes pain to the individual as well as problems for the system. Thus, the manipulation of an individual to adjust him to the system is seen as a cure for a sickness and therefore as good. Theodore Kaczynski. Listen to enough sales pitches for investment and funding by Silicon Valley startups, and you'll start to pick up on a common refrain when moralizing is used as cover to hand wave away issues with monetization. This rhetoric you will hear is a refrain that harkens back to a vision that was ascended in the late 1990s and early aughts. It speaks to something oddly foreign to anyone born too recently to know of a time before the dominance of Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and a handful of tech companies now currently running the web. When Linux was for hobbyists first and servers second, and Apple computers had only one mouse button. In those early days of open source and internet innovation, the notion of distributed individual control was paramount. Tinkering is one thing, but being able to read and see all the software powering your machine and then make changes to it meant you really truly owned your computer. The notion of open source and freedom of expression at every level was baked into early internet culture, from the view source option in browsers, which predates JavaScript, to the spread of open culture licensing beyond code to art via Creative Commons license, to collaborative, ever iterative nature of wiki. In a world where duplication and propagation of information was virtually free, the idealistic vision of collective ownership and individual empowerment were not at odds. It was a bold time, inspiring the dream of a world without gatekeepers, and where voluntary cooperation would propel us forward to the benefit of all. But the dream was not to last. The ravages of centralization, monetization, and stagnation set in. Standards boards became less neutral spaces to advocate for users and more ways for powerful companies to assert their vision upon them. Tell them they were not users anymore, but consumers. Ads and tracking became baked into everything, and code obfuscation and ever expanding dark patterns took hold. Now, 4 paragraphs of content will require loading 3 ads, a pop up demanding you subscribe, and 12 meg JavaScript framework files and a tracker cookie. Even the open source community lost their vision. Where once they pushed for computing being based on designs and logic that people can look at and scrutinize, they abandoned that niche. With the adoption of Linux in the server space, there was suddenly money to be made from free software. Why insist on open code when adding proprietary pieces expanded your market share via vendor lock-in? Why prioritize simple and clear code when you can make money from support? the open source community slowly abandoned the notion of readable, legible code, chasing adoption, and promoting the free, as in no cost, aspect over community maintained and contributor driven culture. Now your Amazon Echo runs Linux to connect back to servers at Amazon's data center. It sends your commands to proprietary code on those servers that then do all the heavy lifting and tell the Echo what to do and how to respond. The Android phone operating system, based on Linux, is open source, but uses the black box of Google Play services to validate applications and provide the API calls that power most of the system's functionality. There are numerous free services for email and blogging, allowing any individual to make their own personalized web page and connect with people around the world through open protocols, but most keep in touch through Facebook. We've replaced devices with dedicated keyboards meant for creating content with larger screen take anywhere content consumption machines. You typically get only half, if that, upload speeds compared to your download rate. You aren't meant to share, only consume in the new internet. The open market of ideas was swallowed by the market of consumer technology and speculative tech investment. Consumerism won and open culture lost. In this new internet space of ad-driven content and quantified users as marketing endpoints, community-generated content is a liability and a threat. All comments and spokespeople must be carefully moderated and curated, lest they risk associative damage to the brands that they are being promoted. If users cannot be tracked or the content they see is uncontrolled, then how can they be sold to retailers, political campaigns, and scammers who want to sell them something? To this end, people-driven oversight of content simply doesn't scale as cheaply as software. Furthermore, the upfront cost of establishing large automatic filters for flagging or moving or hiding unwanted content is staggering. A few laws or for hefty fines for hate speech, obscenity, or some other censorious law, and suddenly the barriers to entry are too high for new competition, thus aiding in the consolidation and domination of the internet by a few large tech firms. But wait, it gets worse. The algorithms and software that handle this large-scale monitoring aren't coded by anyone directly. It's not even a trade secret to which only people behind the curtain are privy. It's a trained black box heuristic operating on logic that no human can coded or comprehended. And it's just suspended your bank account, which you can of course appeal by sending a message to another automated system. There are of course other spaces on the internet, places where the content is ephemeral and which no search engine can touch. The ability to post, say, or share something and not have it live forever is now a killer feature of some platforms. In the anonymity of the dark web and the decidedly unpopular niche corners of tech, the old ways thrive. Remix culture sometimes edges to the boundaries of legality, other times it completely disregards them. That BSD operating system that Apple ripped off, it's still going strong in its various iterations, with a culture akin to what Linux once was. You can create a free email account while surfing the web using a VPN or Tor, and create a fly-by-night Discord account to listen and lurk and learn from strangers. And of course, there still exists that living mascot and temple to internet freedom and culture, 4chan. Perhaps some people don't want to be free. Maybe most of them just don't see their chains. But for those of us who wish to opt out of the censored, controlled, and decidedly corporate world of the mainstream internet, we still can. It's just a matter of knowing where to look. Ask your Signal or Telegram group for directions. What's that? You use WhatsApp? Go back to Reddit. So that had a bit of a different tone from the other chapters, but hopefully it was still enjoyable.
Oh, absolutely, very much so. Extremely. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Mr. Drewish? I mean, thank you so much. I really enjoy these, listening to an author read their rating and someone as interesting and intelligent as yourself. It's always a pleasure. So I want to thank you for sharing.
Oh, not a problem. Not a problem. I think I made a few notes as I was reading. Oh, I have a typo here. Oh, I should reword that kind of a thing. But it's very helpful to read aloud just to clarify the thoughts and make sure that I'm expressing the ideas in the way that I want to express them. Um, yeah, I mean, as was evident by my rereading of the dedication, the whole point here is to create a work which answers the question of, okay, how do we know what's true? And then gives practical, real world examples and advice that can be followed, where it's both a philosophy book, a self help book, and in many ways also a time capsule for this crazy period of years we live in right now, where finding the truth is both uh, more important and in many ways much more difficult, or maybe not more difficult, but there's just a sense of urgency behind it that it hasn't been clear how important it's been until now, and how much of a personal stake and endeavor it needs to be to look for the truth. Anyways, yeah, I don't think I'll be doing another reading, only because if I read any more chapters, considering I've now effectively read all these podcasts together, almost half the book, there'd be much, I can't give too much of it away. If I will probably actually agree to do another reading when the book is finished. At this point, I have 3 chapters that I'm still touching up, and then I need to do a whole lot of editing. So I know based on the first podcast which we did, oh my gosh, like 7 months ago when I started doing this, that I estimated that it would probably be completed around end of January, beginning of February of this year. I may have been a bit overzealous. It'll probably be a couple more months. Look for it to drop this spring or summer. So yeah, which I'm
420
sure.
release.
What's that?
I said release it on 420, man.
Release it on 420. If not 420, then the 4th of July. One or the other, right? Gotta go.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah. So I'll and again, if anyone has any kind of criticisms or thoughts that they don't feel comfortable sharing, obviously a recorded podcast, you can always I'm around this place often enough. You can just bug me about it. I respond to my DMs usually.
No, it's extremely well written. It's high quality content on an intellectual level as well as linguistically. It's well structured. So it's a pleasure to listen to, and it'll be a great book. I highly recommend everybody buy the book when it comes out. We'll even put it on our web store if we can. Whatever, advertise it. I would certainly buy it, and I'd recommend you do as well. And it's going to be called Practical Epistemology in the 21st Century. Is that correct?
Practical Epistemology: Finding Truth in the 21st Century.
There you go. So you're going to want to hear it. You're going to want to buy it, support it, listen to it. And I posted in general chat the first 2 episodes of Drewish's podcast, Practical Epistemology, Finding Truth in the 21st Century, and Practical Epistemology Part 2, Drewish RTP. And once this is uploaded, which will be tomorrow, because we have paid staff now doing this, which is awesome. And they're doing a great job. We'll have the whole trilogy available tomorrow, and we'll post it as a trilogy.
Put it in a playlist.
Absolutely. So listen to it. I will certainly listen to it again to process it better. But what I did retain was very high quality indeed. And epistemology is the root of all disciplines, right? If you don't have good epistemology, you're building with bad materials. So it's good stuff.
Epistemology, I think if there's anything up there with epistemology, it's actually aesthetics. Because who cares what ideas you can come up with if you can't effectively communicate them, then they die with you. So I guess those are the 2 that I love the most, because one is how we determine what's true, and the other is how we retain and preserve it. Well, I mean, not directly, but if I have a modernist didactic sort of approach to art, and so that's kind of aesthetics is a tool for that. Sorry, that's another topic entirely.
Well, it's a very profound topic indeed, and something that's heavily on my mind. And the Round Table and Temple Mount podcast are very much about the second thing you mentioned, which is how to retain and pass on what we know. Right? It's no use if I or you
live our whole lives with all the hard knock education we get and don't pass anything on. It's no use when we die. So if I've learned anything in my 33 years, I must pass it on before I die. That will create what's called legacy. And ultimately, once you get through the early phases of chasing women and chasing status, all that's left is legacy, which is whether or not you made any impact, whether you'll be remembered.
Wait,
And
we're supposed to stop chasing women in status? Oh gosh, made a
you don't
horrible.
have to stop chasing them, but
No, I'm just.
that's
I'm
what you
just.
do when you're young, and then when you get older, you focus on legacy. You start caring about whether you're remembered, and if so, are you remembered for good or bad things?
Well, I would comment more on that, but there actually is there's a chapter in the book dealing with individuals versus institutions that actually touches upon. Well, I guess I'll give something away here, because institutions are so corruptible, because entropy exerts itself upon them in very predictable ways. If you try and preserve your legacy through an institution rather than through either individual connections or individual people or pieces of work and art, or let me put it this way, if you build a building, that's a much better legacy than uh, leaving behind a company in that building, if that makes sense. There's something solid and more concrete and foundational to it, even if it's not made of concrete. If you leave behind a book, or you created albums of music, or something other, an artistic endeavor, or you raised children and taught them well, and if you've done those sort of discernible things, you're going to have a much more profound and positive legacy. Because if you look at something like the Nobel Prize, we'll just take that as an example. I mean, does anyone even really give a damn about the Nobel Prize like they once did? How many times has a Nobel Peace Prize gone to someone who later became a mass murderer? Like, that's happened multiple times. You could say that the hard sciences, the Nobel Prizes, might mean something, but it was created specifically because the guy who created it didn't want to be remembered as the guy who created like dynamite, like for for creating explosives that were used in war. And so this was a way of him being like, well, this is what I'll be remembered for having this prize that rewards science, and that will be my legacy. But the problem is that your legacy is not yours once you're gone. In fact, it's not always even yours even while you're here. And the sort of people who are drawn to centralized power systems, who are drawn to institutional authority, will pervert your message, your image, in the name of whatever they're trying to promote, whatever their views are. And your legacy, or your vehicle for your legacy, will not be your own. I mean, look at the uh, the Tolkien Society, which is basically turned into bashing Tolkien for not being inclusive enough. A society based upon admiration of Tolkien's work has been conquered, and co-opted to then start trashing Tolkien's very work. And there's plenty of examples in this. A clear example being like, Martin Luther King Jr. We just had we just had his holiday. I mean, you do know that after the I Had a Dream speech, after the Civil Rights Act, after this, he was still around for quite some time. But for but what happened was he started speaking out against the Vietnam War. And so while he had been a political patsy, and I'm not allowed to quote what on this server what Lyndon B. Johnson said. We'll just leave it at that. For co-opting votes once he was no longer politically expedient because he was taking a position which was opposed to the powers that had before supported him, then he was dismissed. But those years where he was opposing those same systems of power are scrubbed from history. They're never taught, because when you are taught about the legacy of these individuals, you're always taught about the ones that's beneficial to them. Like Mahatma Gandhi, his number two was engaged in violent rebellion against the Brits, against the British occupation of India, and he was having a huge success in that. And so, knowing that they were going to probably lose, because how many people there in India? It's it's an upswelling they propped up Gandhi. It's like, well, Gandhi, we're following the ways of Gandhi because he was promoting peace, and so they chose the peaceful, representative as, oh, he won, he convinced us, when it wasn't actually what he was doing that forced them into capitulation. In the same way that we learn a lot about certain parts and aspects of Martin Luther King, but we don't talk about Malcolm X, who I actually have a whole lot more respect for Malcolm X and what he said, to be completely blunt and honest about it. The heroes that are given to us are the heroes that have been selected and painstakingly chosen so as to exemplify to us that if we oppose the power systems, or that, first of all, that we shouldn't oppose the power systems to cast them as being oppositional and to be, fighting the good fight, even as they're the ones in power, which should be self-contradictory to anyone with room temperature IQ, or to convince us that if we're going to oppose the system, that we should do so passively, non-violently, and appeal to their better natures, because that leads to the kind of opposition which is just easily blinked away, laughed off, scuttled off, and just, the revolution will not be televised. There are so many instances where you're just not being told about the number of people who are protesting in various places and the nature of those, because the powers that be have no incentive to tell you about a protest unless the protest is for something that they supported all along, and they riled up protests with their news anchors who are there to shape your view of the truth, not to actually deliver the truth. But I'm touching upon a lot of things that I get into much greater detail about later on in the book. There is one chapter I think people will love, which is the true nature of conspiracies, explaining. Like I said, the book, while there is a point to the book and it's being educational in that regard, the things that you have heard in the book are largely the introductions, largely setting the groundwork, establishing the terms, and making the first generalized points. And the details, the specifics of tying them to activities in our modern day and what that means on a larger scale for your life, not simply in what you do, how you determine who you trust, but also in determining how to act upon what you know as the truth and the limitations of what the truth can actually do, and how they're all in there. And so, yeah, there's way more to this book than what you've heard. So I'll leave it at that. And I've rambled on far too much. I think we can end it there.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast for a third time, Drewish. Thank you to the audience for attending, the recorders, uploaders, and please listen to the first 2 episodes of the trilogy in the general chat. We'll upload the whole trilogy tomorrow. Thank you, Drewish, for your time and your content. And thanks, everybody. Let's jump up to the forum, I guess, or the video chat. But that concludes this podcast, the Temple Mount Podcast, episode 4. You can find it all on the Temple Mount Podcast and the Temple Mount Podcast channel. And we'll be recording quite a few episodes over the next few days, so make sure you keep an eye on the announcements channel. That being said, God bless. See you upstairs.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that I can be used as a measuring stick in that way.
Oh, yeah, because most servers cannot and will not produce, authors writing their own books who are intelligent and blah, 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 right? So that sets us apart.
Well, I will be sure to advertise with you when the book is when the book is complete, for sure. No question about that.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll buy it, and I'm sure a few other people will as well. And
the question I'm going to run into is what formats to release it under. I'm certainly going to have to do an audiobook because I feel like the well, actually, you know what? That we just left the podcast. We can do a different topic. Let's not dominate that now. Something else.
I'm not sure.
Excuse me. So Shogun, this is an odd question, but do you play any games?
Me?
Yeah, either are you like a card game person? Do you have like a video game you like to play? Are you like, I have this mobile game I'm addicted to on my phone? You know, I
Well,
don't suppose you necessarily have a lot of time for games. I'm just wondering.
mhm.
Yeah, well, Shogun doesn't work, so he has time for games all the time.
I actually like games a lot. I haven't played any games since basically I made the Roundtable server because that kind of became my quote unquote game. You know, it's a game of sorts. Discord, that is. So I haven't really played much in the last few years, but I've played the Elder Scrolls series, Morrowind, Skyrim, Oblivion. I've played the Mass Effect series, Mass Effect 1, Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3. Played the Total Warhammer games. Doom, everything from classic Doom to Doom Modern Doom. Quite a few games, yeah. Master of Orion.
Masters of Orion 2 was an amazing game.
And that's one of the greatest games ever made, dude.
If it weren't for the fact that it takes forever to play, if they found a way to do simultaneous play, that's all it would need. If you just took Masters of Orion and you said, okay, we're going to make the turns simultaneous, so everyone's kind of doing their turns at the same time, and there'd be simple ways in order to balance it at. That game would be so improved for multiplayer, and then I'd play that all the time then. Because the only downside is if you play and there are like 5 people, you're sitting there waiting for your turn, you know what I mean? So you lose focus.
Good stuff, man. Good stuff. Sorry, I gotta go home. It's so goddamn cold out. It's like literally colder than Mars. And we just like walk around like it's normal. It's so stupid.
Yeah, I mean, Winnipeg's not too. You're actually probably a little bit colder than Chicago. Now that I think about it, you're a little further north. I mean, but yeah, because
Pretty freaking intense at times. I'll say that.
I mean, the Buffalo area had a lot more snow, but it wasn't nearly as cold. So, different kind of and with pandemic situation where people are kind of locked down anyways, there's no real, like, man, the incentive to go outside, like when it's this cold and there's all that stuff, I don't want to go anywhere. I'm like, yeah.
Well, I'm gonna get some nicotine tonight. I think.
No, I have a question. We pulled Rafi's mic up here. Does that mean Rafi's still recording?
Probably, yeah. But
Oh,
I'll fix it. I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to move him back down. But yeah.